Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today we have Brian Walker, the President of Statwax. Brian leads the operations and strategy for a team of SEM, SEO, and CRO experts providing digital tactics for SaaS and B2B clients. He comes from a background of using data, digital, and general nerdiness to help businesses get more from their marketing dollars. Brian, welcome to the podcast. Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk to you about kind of nerding out about some of these analytics, these stats, the metrics, all that good stuff. So to kick us off, tell me a little bit about Statwax. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so we are a digital agency, which is pretty cliche, I know, but we specialize in the B2B SaaS space. So we are really trying to, bring that ads execution to B2B or to SaaS brands, especially in that startup mode, really looking to figure out, how do I scale my marketing? How do I kind of cut through some of the noise in this digital space that's so full of SaaS? Everyone wants to be the next unicorn. How do I do that profitably when I don't have millions of dollars to throw at the wall for it? And, we're really trying to control that full marketing piece. So we're trying to bring data folks, design, brand building, as well as that ads execution into the mix to help our partners really grow and be smart about how they're doing it.
Yeah. So as you know, like when you start digging into stats and metrics, there's a lot there, right? And what I always talk about with my clients is, sometimes if you look too broad, you get basically analysis paralysis. There's too much to cut through. There's just too much to process. So when you take on a client, how do you help them work through that process and kind of find the numbers that matter?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Analysis paralysis. It's just so many metrics. And when we get started with clients, regardless of size, it seems like, they want to know how the ads are being engaged with, what's happening on their website, what's happening with their leads, what's happening when their sales team gets them, like all these different things. But at the end of the day, I haven't met a business yet who doesn't say their real primary goal is, am I getting customers and am I getting revenue? So really trying to trace backwards the threads that connect to that. And I think that's where a lot of folks in digital, even now, are still getting some black boxes in the analysis of what can I use to actually tell me at the end of the day, are all these other metrics vanity metrics, because I can see who became a customer and how much money I made out of them. And that's always easily said and oftentimes very difficult to do, to tie all those threads together. But we really try and start by building that roadmap of, if this is your customer, let's look backwards from the point that they pay you to all of the things that you have available to tell you what they were doing. And through that is where we start to see, okay, you have a CRM, but no one is putting different milestones into it, so you can't see what's happening there. Or you have lead capture on your website, but nothing's in place to tell you how those folks got to your website. And as we kind of work backwards, we start to identify the gaps a little bit. And that's where we're able to say, all right, you know what? Once this is in place, it doesn't matter what your ad click-through rate is, because we're going to see which channels helped eventually steer someone to be a SQL and a customer and an LTV of this amount. And we start to kind of strip out those things that don't matter and build them that map and that journey of what does matter and what's influencing it.
Yeah. And one of the things I always mention to my clients too is that, like, couple things. First, you have to identify the parts of the metrics that matter today, because it can change. Like, you can care more about these numbers today and these other numbers tomorrow and these other numbers 6 months from now. You have to just kind of figure out where you're at in the process and then figure out what it takes to move the needle in these different areas so that you can graduate to the next set of numbers. And the other thing I always mention is, where are you putting your efforts? Where are you putting your intentions? Because if you're intentionally putting your efforts in certain areas and those numbers aren't moving, then either something's wrong or quit putting your efforts there. And then vice versa. If you have good things happening in an area where you're applying no efforts or no pressure, then you should probably take a look at that too, because if you actually did apply pressure there or did apply those efforts, maybe those numbers go even further. So a lot of times I think clients, they want to believe that the numbers just give you the answers. And it's like, no, the numbers will kind of show you where the pain points are and kind of point you in certain directions. But the answer kind of lives behind the scenes as to where you're putting those efforts. And to your point, where you have those different call to actions and where you're capturing information.
Exactly, exactly. Numbers are a great guide. You can't hide from the data, and that's why we nerd out about it so much. But you're absolutely right. Like so often, we might have someone who says, "I need to build all this brand awareness, so I need like these display efforts going on, and put my name out there with thought leadership and everything." And that's great, but if we're putting all the effort into that, and all the numbers say people are engaging with this content and they've signed up for your webinar and everything, but nothing's happening after that to nurture them back in and make a sales pitch, you could be kind of leaving them up to their own, and not actually capturing the intent there, not actually doing that key next step. And that's where we find, as you said, like, here's what the numbers at different stages mean, and here's where we need to go beyond that and really strategize on what your customer needs to see along the way that the data doesn't tell you, right? And that's where oftentimes things, you put all the eggs in one basket or another, and you don't realize you're sort of screaming into the void, because then nothing's happening at the key moment later on that it needs to happen. You're leaving so much on the table.
Yeah. And, just on that, because as you're explaining that, you're kind of reminding me of, I'm having like PTSD of like client, client discussions on some of this. But, one of the things that I always get told, and it's almost a pet peeve of mine, but at the same time, I agree with it to a point. I agree with the comment that the numbers don't lie, because that's a comment that gets thrown around a lot in marketing, and especially within the SEO paid ad space. Now, to some degree, I agree with that. However, if you don't go into those numbers with with intent and expectation and some kind of understanding of what those numbers mean, the numbers are not lying to you, but they're very misleading if you go in uneducated. So like when people say the numbers don't lie, it's like, well, they're not lying to you, but depending on how you're looking at them, you could be skewing the result one way or the other. So you have to look at the back end context of what you're doing.
Definitely. That's a great point, a great way to put it. They don't lie, but they can tell a dozen different stories at once, depending on how you want to interpret it a little bit. That's a tale as old as time. And it's funny. Now you're giving me the PTSD a little bit too, of, people who come in and say like, why did all my leads go down? And we say, well, yes, that is true. In fact, your lead volume did go down. However, did you or did you not get 3 times as many customers out of those fewer leads? So your sales team didn't have to bog themselves down with garbage ones quite as bit. Like, there's always more to that thread as you start to pick it apart a little bit. And that's what's so dangerous, to your first point about like just looking at the numbers on the surface at face value as what they are in a silo, and not going deeper and behind the scenes and seeing, what is the true story? What is the full journey that it's telling me here?
Yeah. And always, where are you putting your efforts? Because let's just say those numbers come back and they're telling you great things. If you can't look at those numbers and remember or recall or even deliver why they are what they are, or what you did to make them that way, or what as a company you did to intentionally drive certain metrics, then you're flying blind regardless of whether or not the numbers are good.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the smartest thing any marketers can do is, assuming you're working kind of, to use a cliche, a little more full funnel. If you have the budget for just like a singular tactic, there's different stuff there. But if you've got multiple channels the biggest issue we tend to find when clients come on board that are running it themselves is every single channel and tactic is held to the same KPI. Everything across the board must convert to leads and eventually customers. And the first thing we try and do is walk that back and say, no, if this is at the top of the funnel just to build awareness, your KPI should be, does it put eyeballs on your thought leadership or get folks to visit your product page for the first time? If you're all the way down to some intense search remarketing, that KPI should be immediately producing an MQL or something like that. And so tying the whole effort and all of your spend to this single ultimate business goal, I think is where a lot of folks go wrong, because all of a sudden, if you don't dig deeper and look, as you're saying, you're going to end up turning off all these higher funnel things that look like they're not working, when in reality, with a little bit more digging, you might find they're actually the first things that are pushing every eventual customer that you're getting.
Right. They could be a silent contributor to the whole thing. And just because the numbers don't look the way you think they should, you could be discarding them really quick.
For sure.
Yeah. The other thing I talk about with clients too is that, I think we have this singular mindset that like, And of course, the obvious is, what do you want to do with your paid ads? Well, I want to make money. I want to grow acquisition. Yeah, we get that. Everybody wants that. But what is the metric? What's the goal? What's the measuring stick? Because when you get there, you didn't necessarily accomplish the goal or win. Like the fight's not over. Now you have to take a look at like, hey, we hit our goal. Perfect. Now we have to look at the cost of acquisition. Was it good? Was it bad? What's our budget? Like you have to start to kind of pull it backwards now and to see, kind of, are you as efficient as you could be? What are your margins? Like I said, what's your
Hmm.
cost of acquisition? Because this whole game of metrics and ads, and I think it's super, super powerful, but it's a never ending science experiment that you have to continue to pay attention to and just peel back those layers and find that next thing. Because I don't know that you'll ever have 100% control over all these different silos, but
Hmm.
as much as you can positively influence, that visibility will gain you mountains and mountains of just, customer insight, customer education. And if you can kind of stay with that mindset over time, I think you'll be able to run a lot more successful campaigns, kind of to some degree at will.
Hmm. Definitely. It's funny, you say we'll never have full control because I immediately think like, well, if it's up to Google, we'll have almost no control. But hopefully, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But you're absolutely right. Like it's this game that we're always playing. It's this puzzle that we're always trying to fit another piece into. And for us, we're marketing nerds. Like we love that challenge of what comes next. I'm always fond of saying, until 100% of folks on your website convert and become customers, there's always something you can tweak to make it just a little bit better. We've not found anyone who hits that metric yet. I would be led to believe that in marketing, it's not complete for anyone. But just as you said, if your acquisition cost is good, if you were profitable, could you be more profitable? What lever has not been pulled yet? What has not been looked at to determine, in my CRM system, what behaviors and trend lines am I not exploring that could get just a little bit more out of this audience or out of this messaging? Is my budget reaching everyone available in what I currently have? Is there diminishing return? Like there's so many of those next steps, and that's the fun, trying to dig in and find those threads a little bit to turn something good into just that much better next time around.
Yeah. And I know that's part of our job to kind of help clients understand that mindset. But like for anybody who's listening to the podcast, whether you're in marketing or you're just looking for marketing solutions, that mindset alone is a huge victory because you're able to see things a little bit more clearly and not get fixated on, even positive or negative results that may or may not mean what you think they mean.
Definitely. I think like the biggest misnomer that I always hear is like if you're talking A/B testing, right? Testing two elements or two channels. I hear so many people say, well, this one failed. This was the failing one. And I'm like, what's really a failure? The point of A/B test is there was a winner that you iterate off of. You actually came out successful because now you know what you're going to do to continuously improve and just keep moving momentum upward. The one that failed was just the one that performed a little bit less. That's actually a win for you as a business. Your marketing is about to get just that much better because you know what works better. And now you try again and you keep, moving on from there. So the worst thing I always feel like we can see is just something is just left to stagnate and just, well, it's working, so we're going to leave it working. And then by the time you realize your competitor's eating your lunch on these keywords or you've missed out on this audience or something, who knows how much you've left on the table in that span of time.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's a mindset. Cause even to your example on the A/B testing, I would question, not to ruin anybody's day, but I would question the one that won. Like, let's say you did an A/B test and one of them was the clear winner. Here's my question. Did the people that chose that winner, are they customers? Are they buying stuff? Are they spending money? Because if they're people who don't spend money with you, then that was not, you just catered to a bunch of people who don't buy from you. That's not really a good result. So we have to come back then and say, okay, is our list polluted? Do we have to, like, to your point, you just got to keep breaking it down to figure out if you're hitting the right people. So that said, if I'm a company and I come to you, what are the milk, eggs, and bread of this process? How do I start? Where do I get this process going so that I get off on the right foot?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest part of it for us is the tracking element. And honestly, if I'm talking to a prospective client, I even tell folks, I'm not going to sell you on StatWax being just ads executors, because I got a neighbor whose brother's cousin has Google Ads certification. He can sell himself the same way. For us, it's about that tracking element, because to your point, A/B test, this messaging gets twice the engagement and twice the eyeballs to your website as this one. Is that truly a winner? With just that information, sure. But did they actually fill out a lead form, follow up with your sales team, buy your product, have better lifetime value than this other cohort? That's where it comes down to. But so many folks are missing that boat because it's some tracking setup and some back-end setup that, even if you're running paid search, isn't necessarily always at the top of mind to do. So the first thing we'll start with is look at that piece behind the scenes. Do you have clean analytics on your website? Are you capturing leads? Awesome. Hopefully you are. But are you also capturing hidden tracking information there? Do you have hidden fields on your form to pull in your tracking parameters so that when someone enters your CRM, you can look and see this lead came from this channel and this click ID and all of that, right off the bat with nothing else. Then you can at least see which ad efforts and channels and marketing are driving customers, disqualified leads, et cetera. You can start to even do some manual analysis. There's certainly more there that, we could nerd out on all day long about bringing that info back into ads platforms and everything. But it's simplest if you can at least get it so that post-lead, post-sales conversation, you can look and see the quality of person that came from each marketing channel. That right there opens up a world of possibilities to evaluate which of your dollars are truly making an impact for you and which can you feel confident you don't need in play right now.
Yeah. And are you hitting the right people? You got to look at those numbers sometimes and look at the level of, purity and pollution. And like, am I hitting the right people? Because I always think about it, like even on a social media front, I have a lot of clients, they'll come to me with a number, I've got 1,000 followers on this or that. And I'm like, well, how many of those are friends and relatives? Because if it's 90% friends and relatives, it doesn't count. Because unless those people are customers and buying stuff from you, I'm not saying they can't be in the number, but you can't hang your hat on that without qualifying who's in that group of people.
Exactly. And that's where it starts to get so powerful, breaking those lists down a little bit and seeing who is right for this. If they don't appear right, that's the other thing that we really encourage teams to look at with their sales team, because that sales and marketing, classically can butt heads a lot. Marketing will say, I'm giving you all these leads. Sales will say they're all garbage. And then you just sort of yell at each other. So the first thing, we try and encourage businesses to look at is, if someone's coming in and they're at least intent driven enough to fill out a lead form and say, I want a conversation, if it appears they're not the right person, does your sales team know something about why? So many times businesses want to tell us why people do buy from them. Here's our value prop. Here's our differentiator and all of that. We like to ask, of those you talk to, why didn't they buy? Why did they choose your competitor? Why did they tell your salesperson, thanks, but not at this time? Is it money? Is it you don't have something they thought you had? They didn't realize what it was you sold? That to us can be more powerful to change up marketing, change up landing pages and all than anything, because we know now, as you said, we're seeing that they're not the right audience. But so often marketers walk away at that point and wholesale change it without first saying, can we tell what makes them not the right audience?
Right. Because, just throwing blanket percentages out there, a 5% increase in missed opportunities or a 5% increase in client retention could be more than a 5% increase in new client acquisition. So you have to look at them all and see, where are we missing things? Because maybe the client acquisition is actually harder than the retention or the missed opportunities. So you got to look at that too, because I would dare say in most scenarios, getting a new client is a lot more work than keeping the ones you got. So what are we doing wrong here? Where are we missing the boat? So
sure.
The point is those numbers, and you'd already kind of mentioned the sales process. These numbers are not only pivotal and important to the inner workings of the company, but they can also be communicated then and shared with the sales team, the marketing team. How does branding play into this? All of these different things. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you coach clients on how to connect those dots?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thoughts are that's so vitally important. I think a lot of times where marketers, whether agency or in-house teams, miss the boat or don't recognize what their true value to the company is when they try and build this one report of their efforts and hope it can be everything to everyone at the company. And the first time you get a C-level person come in and say, what on earth are all these charts and numbers? And why can't you just tell me if I made money or not? That's when you start to realize reports and the story we're telling from all of this need to be different for different folks. And so we do really try and sit down with all the key stakeholders and say, what is valuable to you? I think I know what's valuable to the CEO or the CMO, but I still want to hear it. Like, do you truly just care? Did I get customers? Did I make money versus what I paid you? Sales team, do you want to know what these folks were searching for before they reached out to you so you can tailor your message? We can give you that. Do you just want to know what thought leadership is looked at most on the website before someone comes in so that you can understand maybe what webinars to make new versions of? We can do that. There's all these different threads in there, but they speak differently to different stakeholders on the teams. But the one piece that I encourage marketers, especially if you're new to this space and trying to really learn how to make yourself as invaluable as possible to everyone at the company, the one thing I encourage to always remember is the things you're looking at and in the weeds on can tell a totally different type of story to different roles at your company and be equally valuable to all of them. But you have to get out of the mindset of just, here's one report, same for everybody. Find what you need in all this, because that will fail. And I can't tell you the number of times, C-level has tried to pull the plug on something, not because it's not working, but because it's not being conveyed to them why it's working in a way that they understand and need to see quickly.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's timing. This is probably going to be cringeworthy to a data guy, but like when clients come to me, I feel like a lot of times the idea of, well, are you going to send me monthly reports? Am I going to get, it's all just, you just want something, or you just deliver me something. And I think it's kind of conditional thinking in that we want some of this stuff. Like, just send me a report. I don't really care what it is. I just want to know you're doing stuff and you're sending me stuff. So when clients come to me at the beginning of the process, and we are at its core, we start with the branding, we start with the visuals, we start with it. So when they ask that question, like, hey, are you going to send me monthly reports? Or are you going to give me this, give me that? I just tell them no, because at this point in the process, not that the numbers don't matter, but you're not at the point where you can start pulling levers and pushing buttons to affect those numbers anyway. So let's focus on getting the visuals built. Let's focus on building the ship and getting the brand built. And when you get to the point of setting sail, so to speak, that's when you can start. I mean, we'll pre-work. I mean, we'll do the SEO. We'll put the pieces in place. The pre-work will be done. But after you set sail, that's when you start to look at those numbers and then start to make decisions based off of where you're at in the process and what those numbers mean to you. Because the other thing, and I'll let you jump in on this, but people get sidetracked with best practices. They'll read an article in Fortune magazine, or they'll read, they'll follow their favorite entrepreneur, and they'll grab a hold of these certain percentages that you should be producing X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's great, but it depends on where you're at in the business process. Depends on what tools you have in place. What's your website look like? There's a lot of variables that go into basically attaching yourself to some best practice or percentage that's thrown out there on a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're saying that, because I feel like anyone who's worked in the agency or even the marketing world has had a client, like that. I saw my kid using TikTok. Are we on TikTok? Well, no, you're software for manufacturers. Probably not the right place to put your money and stuff. Like, there's always strategy behind it. But yeah, if you just latch on to kind of what's the hot new thing, that marketing Twitter is talking about, great place to learn information and stuff and, hone your skills as a marketer and all, but really diving into the strategy of everything we've been talking about. What has the data about our customers and about the audience that's working tell us? Where are they being found and where are they not? What about their demographics makes them terrible for TikTok, but great for sponsored messaging on LinkedIn or vice versa. And the reports piece, I love that you say that. And honestly, we should probably do better at that as well. Like everyone wants that report and that instant gratification right away. Like, all right, you've been working, we kicked off 7 days ago. When's my dashboard going to be ready? Well, we're still spinning up, the creative. We're establishing how your CRM is tracking folks. We're getting all those pieces together. A report can show you great stuff, but we've almost taken to trying to figure out ways to show behind the scenes movement, because what a lot of folks not in our seat don't realize is how much heavy lifting takes place to get that first penny of ad spend even ready to be executed on. How much planning, strategy, creative building, copywriting, so on and so on. So finding unique ways to convey that it's a challenge that I've been interested in continuing to kind of iterate through and solve a little bit, but you hit the nail on the head. Like you can't just get a report right off the bat and say, this is the end all be all. Let's take off with what this is saying.
Well, and selfishly, and I don't have any problem telling my clients this if they push too hard on it, but selfishly, I don't want to give reports that haven't had time to build up the metric or the momentum that it needs to give a proper analysis. So if I give you a report too soon, all I'm really doing is setting myself up to be hammered on as to why these numbers are so horrible. But I'm also giving you a lot of misinformation that could influence you into making some decisions, because you're going to think differently after you see those numbers. So until we're ready to show numbers, like the numbers are great, don't get me wrong, but let's not focus on that right now, because it could take us down a road we don't want to go down.
That's a great point. And it kind of reminds me of something we went through pretty recently. If you're looking at your sales figures and the CRM information, this business data, there's even stories in like the lag time a little bit. We'll hand a report over, and this happened pretty recently, and getting hammered because it's early on, why are all of these leads not turning into revenue for us or something like that? And then come to find out, you dig in. Well, for about 2 years, they've been averaging like 45 days from like lead to close. It's been 7. So data would say we probably shouldn't look at the impact of this for a month or so. Whether that 45 days is good or not, those are business conversations, but you're exactly right. And I think that's sort of the thread that we've been talking about this whole time here is the raw numbers might look pretty on a report, but outside of the business context and diving in deeper, they could lead to some very drastic, totally wrong decision-making on what you should be doing with your marketing. And that context even goes as far as saying, how long does it take our customers to move through these conversations or investigate a demo or follow up with us, et cetera?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is important when looking at data is you got to zoom in, but then you got to have the ability to come back out.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go broad, you got to go narrow, you got to go broad, you got to go narrow. You got to always kind of look at the forest between the trees. You got to be able to look big and then dial in where needed, because there's just too many metrics, there's too many variables, there's too many things to take into consideration. And to really have a good plan of action, you got to gain control, or at least gain visibility on certain pieces so you know what you're talking about. And what I love about what you guys do is that, you're somebody who can not only stay up on the trends and kind of what the changes are in the industry and how these numbers are pulled and how they're quantified, but then also relaying them to the client. Because I think that's the hardest part. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's really difficult to, be a marketing director or to be a creative director or to be somebody who's accountable for a certain job and be a master at analytics and how to analyze them.
Mm-hmm. Any marketers who, can do the numbers and the execution, but know how to turn that into an understandable story, that is a skill that will have you valued anywhere. It's hard to find. We have had trouble finding those unicorns. We've split out execution and like data and analytics kind of separately, but even still, if you have like data science on your team, that still doesn't mean they know how to turn metrics into a narrative and kind of tie those things together. It's a very rare skill. It's a great one to have, because as we've been talking about, there will come a point with a client or within your own company where someone outside of marketing needs to understand why this is working or why it's being invested in. And they're not going to care at all for rows of numbers. It's going to need some sort of actual story and narrative behind it to explain.
Yeah, I always consider it like a translation type position. Somebody has to translate the numbers. Like, I don't need you to read them off to me. I don't need you to point at the bar chart. I need you to tell me what they mean and where we need to apply pressure. And
Yep.
from a hierarchy standpoint, give me the good, better, best so that I can focus on the stuff that matters.
Definitely. And tell me what didn't work and why. I feel like that might actually be harder than anything. It's one thing to look at something that's been taking off like crazy and say, well, this really worked because we found our audience and all this. Something that we think will work that just isn't, finding the reasons why to that and conveying it is even more difficult. But when you can figure out how to do that and do it well, all of a sudden you can react quicker, iterate faster, and just, I don't know, at least from an agency standpoint, being quick to say, here's what we tried that didn't work and why, and here's what we learned from it and what we're doing. That almost builds more trust and transparency with clients, because very few clients are going to expect everything to work 100% of the time. If they do, that's an unrealistic expectation, and cut that off quickly, because that's only going to burn you. But it definitely serves well to be very adept at quickly finding what is not performing the way it was expected and what we can glean from that because of that.
Right. And that's actually a really good point. And just will kind of be my last question for you, because we've gone on for a while here. But when it comes to kind of client expectation, I feel like one of the things we run into a lot is that they assume because you're an ads expert or you're somebody who works in that space, that you just know how to do it. And I think that's true to a point, but I think what most clients don't understand coming in, especially if they've had no prior experience with it, is that getting to the successful campaigns means you got to go through a series of failures too. So you have to try stuff. You have to do different things to see what works, what doesn't work. And this sort of worked, but not as well as I thought. So now we're going to do this. It's an ongoing process of learning to get to something that works. And then when you find one that works, you ride it out as long as you can until Google makes a change or Facebook makes an update, until it doesn't work anymore. Then you start over.
Exactly. I would love to say that just right off the bat, we know what's going to work for a new client and we understand their business and their audience. Haven't found it yet. I don't know many that operate that way, but you're exactly right. It's a constant game of test, learn, iterate, test again. Always pulling off the successful ones and letting them ride out their momentum and building them to as best as they can be. We often recommend, whatever your budget is, try to figure out a piece of it that you can split off just for testing. Don't hold it to like your end all business metrics, knowing that it's a 50-50 shot at best. It might not work, but we'll learn the why if it doesn't. And if it does work, great. It's now a part of our bigger ongoing strategy that we can build off of. But that fear of testing new things because of fear of what it'll do to the goals and the budget if it doesn't work, leaves so many businesses missing the boat on potential opportunity, and they don't even realize what they're leaving on the table.
Right. Or they're two things. Or they're scared to spend that testing money because they feel like it's money that just, okay, that money's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Or it already erodes the confidence in the people who are running the ads. And my whole point in bringing it up is I want listeners to understand this is the normal. This is exactly how it works. That testing process and getting to the point of success takes a little time. So if you're being courted by or solicited by a company that just says, we don't do that, we just hit home runs, they're lying. They have to work through the process as well.
Definitely, yes. Be very wary of the 100% success rates in pitch decks and everything. It just, on the whole, over time, you should see success. That is smart marketing.
Yes.
There have to be wins and losses within that in order to steadily increase momentum. It's just, there's no other way around it.
Yeah. What I always talk about with clients is right at the beginning, we're just trying to make the playoffs. We're not trying to win the World Series. We're not trying to win the NBA championship. We're just trying to make the playoffs. And if we can make the playoffs and win more than we lose, you're going to be budget positive. You're going to be, you're going to feel good about the direction. And then maybe we make a run for the title, but we got to make the playoffs before we can hit hit that big home run in the World Series.
There you go. Exactly. Well said.
Yeah. So, Brian, thank you for being on the podcast. Before we go, tell me a little bit about where they can find more information about StatWax.
Absolutely. Statwax.com, probably the quickest and easiest way. You can reach out to me directly, Brian, Brian, at statwax.com. I am always available, always happy to chat if there's something today that you heard that you wanted to dive into more.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand retro mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.